I covered women's magazines for 3.5 years and got to know a lot of the editors and the publishers, and I know that they're not evil. Like, it's hard to explain that to our readers. I mean, I think sometimes they do things that are not good for women, but they believe really, they love fashion, or they feel like they're writing about global issues that matter also. Many of our readers probably never bought women's magazines. I think that maybe actually they just hate them, but they're not actually consumers of them. But I think the main difference between what I would consider quote-unquote mainstream media, even though I don't use the phrase, has to do with being part of large corporate apparatuses that limit what you can say. So although we are a big site and we've been around for 3 years, we work for a company that never, ever tells us what to say, and we never run anything by anyone, and we, occasionally that's upsetting for our advertising staff, but that honesty is part of the brand. And I know when I worked at Condé Nast, all of these people maybe wanted to do things that their hands were tied because they were part of these huge, they were part of Time Warner, they were part of News Corp, and their hands are tied in that way. So the advantage that we have is that kind of nimbleness allows us to be really responsive and really honest and answer questions. The Marie Claire debacle that you mentioned, which involved one blogger really pissing everybody off in the way that she wrote about overweight people, they tried to deal with that in a web way, which is that they asked people to write responses. They tried to get new voices in and so on. And I think that was sort of the best that they could have done. They didn't fire the writer, but I think, all these editors of women's magazines are trying, but one of the reasons that they can't be us is because they have so much more money on the line. They're still really big businesses, and that is to their detriment because, the readers that we are growing, that we're bringing in, really value the fact that we're accessible and that we'll tell them when we messed up, and that we're going to be, we're going to be there in a sort of clear and transparent way. And we all know, anyone who's ever worked for a big company, you don't get to have that transparency because there's so much more at stake.
I think we have time for just one more question before we break for lunch, so we'll take one more question. You.
Hi, my name is Maura, and I work at Reuters. It's really clear that you guys take your roles as curators really seriously, and the work that you do is fantastic evidence of that. And I'm just interested to hear from you what organizations or individuals you follow you think are doing really great curatorial work on the internet.
That's a good question.
Who wants to start?
Well, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say Kotaku, not just because Irin is on the panel with me, but my friend Stephen Totillo is the deputy editor on there. But like I said, so you had the first wave of like big sites that covered games that came after the magazines, and then big blogs like Kotaku. There's a lot of stuff like, Brainy Gamer is someone who's an academic who I think teaches theater somewhere in the Midwest. Dubious Quality. I mean, it's too long a list. We should probably just sort of do this offline. But I mean, there are fantastic people who are writing really thoughtful stuff about games that go a lot deeper than a lot of people might think stereotypically of what games are and can be.
You guys want to list some of your favorite sites or bloggers that you follow?
Well, this mostly happens for me on my Twitter feed. I mean, we're producing so much content that I'm really only reading things that are so focused, unless it's on my off times. And most of the time when I'm not blogging, I want to read a book. But I would say that the people that I follow on Twitter, who I'm always really happy to see their writing, Kate Harding, she's contributed to Jezebel in the past. She writes for the LA Times about TV a lot. Amanda Marcotte, who writes at a bunch of places, including Slate. Lindsay Beierstein, who writes at Big Think. LaToya Peterson at Racialicious, who's also been a Jezebel contributor. I mean, happily, some of these people are part of a larger community. So, but I think that there's a lot of really, really smart people working in the women's space. Shelby Knox, that's another one. There are so many people who've just kind of through Twitter who I feel like I know them so intimately, and their work challenges me all the time. And many of them I've never even met. I'm sure a lot of people in the room have that experience.
I think it's funny. I must admit that I get a lot of my best ideas from people who don't write in the women's sphere. I like to sort of bring things that might not necessarily be on a women's site and somehow make those fit. I used to be a religion journalist for about 4 years before I had this job. So a lot of my contacts are still people who are covering the religion community. And every once in a while, I'll come across, a really great article about something like how the cheerleaders for the Jerusalem basketball team have to be completely covered up and can't do any moves that people might think are sexual. And that became a really interesting story for me. So I follow a lot of good religion journalists. I read Neil Ungerleider, who writes about Israel for Fast Company, is really good. Ravi Samuel Schwartz is great. I also read, both of my parents are deaf, and I'm really involved in the hearing impaired community. So I follow a lot of ASL blogs and a lot of deaf rights blogs. Like The Deaf Way is really fantastic. They're kind of an aggregator site, but that's a good way to get started.